it's important to know that if it's an environment that doesn't work well for you or a supervisor that doesn't work well with you, it might be time for a new job and or a transfer or something like that. I mean, that's an option.
ADHD Rewired, episode 399. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups, and you can learn all about our intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. You can do all of this at our website, ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest returning to the podcast all the way back from episode 170 is Kat Hoyer. Kat is a recovering HR manager. She started as a member of ADHD Rewired's coaching and accountability groups back in 2015. She is the creator of the Steer Your Life coaching program. And she has 9 Steer certified coaches across the country. Her business, SYLC Consulting, brings holistic workplace development to organizations, where she helps organizations talk about stress management, emotional intelligence, and cognitive agility. So, Kat, welcome back to the podcast. It's so nice to finally hit record an hour and 40 minutes after we were supposed to start.
What took you so long, Eric? Do we have some tech problems or something?
Yeah. Maybe a little bit of tech problems, delays at the salon, I guess.
Yeah. So is this going to be on YouTube so people can see how nice my hair looks?
You don't think the people were thinking it was me that was at the salon?
Oh, oops. Yeah, it was you.
Your hair looks great, Kat. Okay. So what we wanted to talk about today, and this is something that I see on a lot of sort of online forums. And this is a thing that gets a lot of people asking, well, what do I do? How do we, as people with ADHD, advocate for ourselves in the workplace for what we need without necessarily coming out and saying we have ADHD?
Yeah, I see
Let's
that.
jump right in.
Yeah, I see it a lot. And actually, you said jump right in, but I want to back up just a little bit because one of the other things I see a lot is I see people like wanting to disclose, thinking that they're going to be covered under the Americans with Disability Act. And I usually do let people know that that's not necessarily true. It's not that you won't be, but you'd have to jump through a lot of hoops to be covered under the Americans with Disability Act. So I think if anyone is thinking like, hey, I'm just going to disclose and that's going to save my job, that's not necessarily the case. So that I think clearing that up first and foremost is really important. The other thing is when it comes to disclosing, the thing that I like to let people know is that once you disclose, you can't ever take that back.
Can't put that cat back in the bag.
No, and the cat with a C, not a K. So anyway.
For everyone who already forgot her name, it's Kat.
With a K. So once you disclose, you can't take that back. And most industries that people are in are very close knit. I've been recruiting in a lot of different industries, and people typically know, they go to work at one place, they know each other. So once that gets out in your industry, it's out. And the reason that's a big deal is that people aren't necessarily educated on what ADHD is, how it manifests, and then everything becomes an ADHD issue. It's just not something that we can educate everyone on quickly. I have some really cool surprises for you that I haven't told you yet about neurodiversity in the workplace. So we'll leave that. We've got that note. Okay. So that's a little bit of
I'm writing surprises so we don't forget and have that thought at 12:30 at night. that surprises us when we're
Yeah.
trying to fall asleep. Oh, she had surprises for me. What was
What
it?
was that? What was that surprise? So
Okay, let me ask you real quick though. You
yeah.
mentioned, because we have listeners all
Mhm,
over the world.
mhm.
So I know that you and I are in the US.
Yes.
Are you able to speak to any of the sort of disability rights in other countries that you're aware of?
I I know that there are some countries that are a little more progressive. So Australia is just a tiny bit more progressive than we are with it.
Really?
That's about all I know.
Okay.
And that's just because I was looking some things up recently and I was surprised at what I was seeing in terms of
In terms of the laws,
I went to
right?
the laws. Yes, yeah. So
That's interesting because I've heard from a lot of people from Australia that says like there's not really many providers. People don't really understand ADHD out there.
and that may be true, but it's also a very employee centric work environment.
Okay.
So that may have something to do with it. But for the most part, I would say no. I can pretty much only speak to the US in terms of like laws, especially with the Americans with Disability Act. Um,
Right. But just by disclosing, at least in the US, that does not mean you are protected.
No, not at all. So and the other thing is with the Americans with Disability Act, it requires a company to give you a reasonable accommodation. Many times the reasonable accommodation or many times the accommodation that ADHDers are looking for when they disclose are things like that have to do with maybe part of the job, like the deliverables in their job, like getting reports on time, getting to work on time, those things. So that's actually a job function. And if you can't do the job function, then it's not the right job for you. And that's an important thing to remember as well. So when disclosing it or I mean, when asking for accommodations, you can ask for, do you want me just to go into some examples? Is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Absolutely.
I think a lot of times we get distracted at work if we're in, especially if we're in the office and it's a noisy environment. So we can ask for things like maybe having our desk moved to an area that isn't quite as high traffic. I know I worked, this was actually before I even knew that I had ADHD, but my desk was kind of in a bit of a hallway. And I asked for walls because, everybody that walked by was somebody I wanted to talk to and have a conversation with. And I did. And I'm like, can we just put up, the little walls that you put up in offices? What are they called? Partitions?
Hmm.
And they're like, yeah, but if you do that, you're going to be completely closed in because we can only fit them like basically around my desk. And I'm like, I need that. And I did. And it was much better. I was much more productive. So that's something that you can do. You can ask for noise canceling headphones or be able to wear headphones so that you can block out some of the noises and distractions. Maybe move your desk in a way that you don't see as much going on. So those are some things physically if you're distracted by what's going on in the environment. um, Another thing that works really well is, first of all, I think getting to know yourself and knowing what are the issues that I'm having, maybe even writing those out, and what does either an accommodation look like or how can I work through it. So an example is accountability, external accountability, finding a way, whether it's your boss, a coworker, is there someone that I can talk to each morning and we go over what we're going to do for the day, and we kind of brainstorm mini deadlines or those types of things, or even asking for, instead of a deadline that's extended 2 months out, actually sitting down and coming up with, like I said, mini deadlines for those, because we know
Check-ins
that,
and stuff.
yeah. So asking, I like to call that managing up. And basically it's just a way to ask your supervisor for some additional accountability. And a great way to do that is to say, I've worked in an environment before that allowed me to do this and it worked really well. I was a lot more productive. So you can use that kind of terminology that, gives you a chance to tell them what would work for you without telling them what's going on.
Would you say that it's, as far as like perspective taking, that you kind of want to go into it and with the idea of the thing that I'm asking for, how is this going to actually benefit the company? Not like what can they do for me, but how can an accommodation that I feel I need be beneficial to whatever the mission or the goals of the company are.
Yes, and that's I mean, anything that we're asking for with an organization, that's the best way to go in it and to literally think about that in terms of, maybe writing it down or verbalizing that. Um, because at the end of the day, we're there to do a job and have deliverables for the organization. So yeah, it needs to benefit the company as well.
What happens to the employee who tries this and gets the response from their boss? No, we do it this way. We want it to be fair, so we do it same across the board, and they get no kind of accommodation.
Yeah, so that is definitely a risk. I think knowing that that could be the answer that you get is something to be prepared for. I actually did have it happen to me because I was in an environment that it worked really well for me to sit down every morning with my manager, talk about what I was doing for the day, and this manager was not about doing that. So, uh, my advice to someone would be to perhaps have some dialogue around it if you can. Is there a reason it doesn't work? Is there a reason you don't think, or do you have any suggestions? I would try to get them involved maybe in some of the negotiation of what might work. The other thing would be to then take it to HR and ask HR, their advice or what could be done, again, without disclosing. And the thing is, with some of these accommodations, it isn't just ADHD people that deal with them. So you're not necessarily revealing your diagnosis. If you are in the HR department and you get that response, it's probably time to look for a new job,
Mm.
which I did. But I do, I think that it's important to know that if it's an environment that doesn't work well for you, or a supervisor that doesn't work well with you, it might be time for a new job. And or a transfer or something like that. I mean, that's an option.
What about for someone who is sort of looking for work currently? What are some of the questions that they might be able to ask during the interview process that, again, doesn't disclose that they have ADHD, but are ways that they can sort of like feel it out and see what kind of environment will this actually be like for me?
I love that question because it's something that I think a lot of people don't realize they can actually do in the interview process. So you are interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you and making sure that
Such
it's
an
a
important
good,
piece.
yes, it's a good time to ask those kind of questions. So asking things like, how does the department run? Does everyone do everything the same way? Then asking things like, even saying, I know this has worked well for me in the past in other places. Is this something that I would be able to do there? So specifically asking those types of questions, whether it's around accountability, around the physical environment. It's okay to ask those kinds of questions in the process. I'm trying to think if there's anything else you'd want to ask. Um, I wouldn't recommend going, what happens if I'm late every day? Or, I mean, obviously you're not going to ask it like that, but like even if it is about a flexible schedule, if it's about, you've got to be careful that you're not raising red flags during that time,
Mhm.
because things like missing deadlines and being late a lot are things that a company would not be, nor should they be okay with. But
I remember asking, this was when I worked at this residential facility. I remember during the interview asking what kind of training and coaching opportunities are there so I can get ongoing feedback to continue to grow.
that's a
Um,
great question, to ask about, especially the ongoing feedback part. And again, saying that it's something that's worked well for me in the past, and that's definitely an option. So I like that. I might steal it from you.
and being that I've worked in sort of human services, that I've learned to ask details about the paperwork, like what's actually involved. 'Cause that's, when you have ADHD, if your job might potentially have a lot of paperwork that's involved in it, like, that's probably gonna be challenging.
Right. And looking at the job description, maybe even going through the job description very detailed, and coming up with questions like, what do I think might be a challenge for me and how can I ask about this in the interview process. I thought when you said paperwork at first, I thought you meant like the onboarding paperwork, but you're
Mm,
talking about just in general as part
yeah,
of the
your regular
job. So
paperwork.
yeah, like what kinds of reports would I have to run? How are those done? Is there time allotted for it? That was one of the things I know in when I did recruit in the therapy industry. That was something that was tough for like physical, occupational, and speech therapists, that they weren't necessarily given time to do the reports, and then yeah, it would hold up billing and all that kind of good stuff. So yeah.
Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, let's keep diving into this idea of disclosing at the workplace, because I think that this is going to be a really helpful conversation for a lot of people. So we will be right back. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from our coaching community, which includes our 10-week intensive coaching and accountability groups and our alumni membership community, where our coaching members can get ongoing support after their coaching season ends, including weekly planning sessions led by myself and our coaches, and more. And this weekend, we're wrapping up ADHD Awareness Month with our first ever registration event on a Saturday. You know, it's hard to take 2 hours during the week to attend one of our registration events. So we're doing one of my very favorite things to do. We're experimenting by having a Saturday registration event. So join us this Saturday, October 30th, for our day before Halloween registration event. And you know why you'll be glad you signed up during our registration kickoff event? Because you'll have pumpkin to talk about, since you'll be way ahead of the curve. You won't have to worry about all the other people gobbling up your spot. It'll be fantastic. I can feel it in my bones. The trick is, in order to treat yourself to ADHD Rewired's coaching and accountability groups, you'll have to go to coachingrewired.com and add your name to our interest list. We'll then drop you an email containing instructions on your next steps. You'll have a few things that you'll need to do first before you get your actual registration invitation. So if you want to join us, you can go to coachingrewired.com right now. So if you want to join us and you can't go to coachingrewired.com right now, be sure to set a reminder for yourself to do it, because thinking that you'll just remember might be wishful thinking. Get ready to have an amazing 2022 by securing, I want to say securing, by scaring, it worked better in my head.
He means securing.
We hope to see you Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. So carve out some time to go to coachingrewired.com and add your name to our interest list, and watch your email for instructions. That's coachingrewired.com. I was going to end with a vampire pun, but they suck. Support for this podcast comes from Adult Study Hall by ADHD Rewired at adultstudyhall.com. It's the ADHD-friendly co-working community, just like I say in the intro of this show, for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. Discover the power of real-time accountability that's shame-free and judgment-free, working with other adults with ADHD who just get it. When you become a member, you'll gain access to our on-demand drop-in room called ASH, which stands for Adult Study Hall, ASH 24/7. That's available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This includes those late nights, the weekends, which means no matter what time zone you are in, ASH 24/7 will be there for you. If you're looking for some more structure, your membership also includes our facilitated sessions, part of our weekly ASH Plus events. Find your focus by joining ASH Plus sessions, where we cover themes like cleaning and decluttering, taskbuster sessions for those dreaded to-dos, workout sessions, job and career accelerator sessions, a Write With Me session, and more ASH Plus sessions are coming soon. Go to adultstudyhall.com to sign up and to learn more about all of our ASH Plus events. And if you haven't joined us yet, what are you waiting for? Membership is only $19.99 a month, and you can try it free for your first week. Grab your to-dos and join the ADHD-friendly virtual co-working community built just for us. It really does make a difference when you're working with people who just get it. So why join something like FocusMate when you can join Adult Study Hall, the community built just for us, adults with ADHD. Go to adultstudyhall.com and check it out. We'll see you there. All right, we are back. Um, I remember, I mean, it's funny because I think about some of my past jobs, and I've always been a really good interviewer. I think I've gotten every job I've ever interviewed for. But one of the things that I learned in terms of like getting accommodations, because I did eventually have to disclose, like, because the writing was kind of on the wall at certain points in my job. I'm like, oh crap, I'm like really behind on my case notes. It was always the case notes. Like that was always the issue. It's my case notes, right? And I had this boss who very like driven type A, person. And this is in a nonprofit residential, so it's like we're all doing the work of like five people, and she would catch me in like walking from one of the homes to somewhere across campus and or in the hallway and like
Mm,
telling me like a couple of things she wanted me to do. And I'm like, I got nothing to write this thing down on. And I'm like, there's no chance in hell I'm going to remember this. So I said to her, I'm like, hey, it would really work well for me if either you tell me a time I can just stop by your office and if you can just share those things with me so I can write these things down, or if you can email those things to me because I want to make sure I get those and I have a couple other things I'm doing right now. Could you do that? And so that was one of the things that I was able to get sort of as an accommodation. As she just knew that like verbal direction on the fly like is not going to work well for me. What works well for me if it's documented and tracked, or I can grab something to write it down.
and had you disclosed already at the time or?
Not at that point. And I
Okay.
do have to say for
Okay.
myself, because I'm working with, at that point I was working with kids who had disabilities. I think there was a little bit more openness to that, but I know that's not the case in all work environments. Um, I had a previous job where when I had to do my report writing, I would always check out the conference room because the staff area was like in the back, and we were all in the same room, and we had these little like cubicles against the wall, and people are on the phone, and I'm just like, oh my god, I cannot like if someone's on the phone, I can't think, let alone write. Right, so I was able to do that. And I was able to also request just flexible schedules. Like I'm like, I'll work on Saturdays if I don't have to be there on Monday when everyone else is there, or something, stuff like that. And one of the things you mentioned was that reasonable accommodations. And I think it's
Mhm.
really important that people understand what that means. And even like you mentioned, like being provided headphones, like noise canceling headphones. And to the best of my knowledge, I don't know of any company that's going to actually provide that for you. Like, I think the best thing is going to be like you bring them on your own and see if you can use them.
Yes, and that would be my recommendation for that. So, um, I'm gonna say what a reasonable accommodation is, and this is not like verbatim
Yeah.
from ADA, but it's basically something that will not cause the company, I'm gonna say undue harm. But that it isn't something that's gonna be so expensive that it's hurting their ability to make profit.
Right.
So it's something like if someone has a hard time, if somebody can't hear, it could be on the phone, like a phone that actually has like a amplifier on it. Or if somebody has, we've had people that have like issues sitting for long periods of time. So a standing desk, those types of things are what's considered a reasonable accommodation. But things that are part of your job description and asking for that to be changed aren't necessarily considered as covered reasonable accommodations. And I think it's important when you said, you mentioned the flexible scheduling and knowing that's another thing that if you are somebody who is consistently late, I mean, first of all, work on that. I mean, I think that's
Yeah.
something that we need to do just in general. Um, but also knowing that I'm someone who also like I would work
says
late.
says the person who came in like an hour late for this.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. Work on that. Cat. So the oh, what was I saying? No.
So,
So for me, I used to work about every other week or so. I would work really late on. There was one evening that I would work really late, or like you mentioned, come in on the weekend, a Sunday when there was no distractions, and I would get so much done. And again, those aren't necessarily things that are just ADHD related. There are other people that could benefit from that as well. So it isn't revealing that, but I think A flexible schedule, asking for that is typically a reasonable accommodation.
I want to ask you about this, and this is outside the scope of this conversation, but I know so many people who they have a full time, maybe salary job, and to meet all the expectations, they are almost like secretly working like 70 to 80 hours a week instead of 40
Right.
hours a week. Um, and their bosses have no idea.
Yes.
And like, and I just like think like, if that is the case, is this the right job, or is this like, or is there more of a need for coaching, or what do you when you see or hear something like that? What goes through your mind?
A couple of different things. One is, again, I go off my own experience of back when I would work late. When I say work late, I mean pull all nighters to get caught up. And I would get caught up, and then it would take me. This is why I did it every couple of weeks, because then I would get behind again. And for me, it was specifically about, not managing parts of my job that ADHD made it hard for me to manage. So things like paperwork, things like email, those types of things. So that would give me a chance to get caught up on everything. I don't recommend it. And I also know that that's something, as long as it's not hindering, for me, it was part of a divorce. I mean, it ended up
Mm,
being at least part of what caused a lot of problems within my marriage. I think another thing to keep in mind is that it's important to be communicating. So back to what you were talking about when in the interview process, asking what the communication and feedback is like. A lot of companies will do regular one-on-ones, things like that, where they're discussing job performance. And if you aren't getting that, requesting that and saying, here's what's going on. My workload seems somewhat heavy. I'm not sure if there are some things that could perhaps be taken off my plate, if there are some things that maybe are taking longer for. I mean, again, you don't want to necessarily put yourself in a bad position, but I want to show you how I'm doing this and see if you have some suggestions for another way to do it. Can I sit with another coworker who's doing this to see how they do it? Something along those lines, but advocating for yourself in a way that is solutions oriented, and you can put some of it back on yourself. How can I, as a store, I worked retail, and as a store manager, that was one of the things I did. Can I travel to another store and just kind of see how they do some of the things that they do? But it's not uncommon, just in the work world in general, for workloads to be too much, not just for ADHD, but for anyone. So I think
yeah,
having that
yeah,
discussion with a supervisor, and it's hard from an HR standpoint. Sometimes I would hear, I mean, I heard a lot, this is too much, I can't get it all done. And I think the other part is to really knowing yourself. So when you said that you got to a place where you had to disclose because you were behind on paperwork, and again, that's where I hear most people come with that question.
when it's like the
It's
7th or 10th conversation about like why my reports are late again.
Yes. And I can say again from my own experience, I had some reports that I needed to do. And I had somebody who said, "Hey, do you want me to help you with that?" And this was before, this was Cat before ADHD rewired. Cat today would be like, probably way before that even happened. I'd be like, "Hey, I need some help. I'm not keeping up with
Hell
this."
yeah.
But that cat said, "Oh no, I can do it. I can get it done." And it was this lie that I was telling myself, that if I just worked harder, if I just worked longer, if I just worked whatever, that I could pull it off. And so I would find myself doing things like, well, first of all, overcommitting. That was part of it. And I think that's when you can find out in your job when you're talking to your manager, if you have so much to do. Is it, am I saying yes to too many people? Can I offload some of this? But also, I kind of talk myself into a corner here because I'm not sure what I'm saying. um, can we talk about how late this is, and that we actually, well, I'm unmedicated. Um,
6:05 my
so
time,
yeah.
7:05 your time.
Oh, 7:05. And I forgot to tell you I haven't eaten today either.
Oh, good
So
cat,
anyway,
cat.
I know it's been a very busy day. So I did have
Wait,
some tortilla chips.
did you say tortilla chips?
Yes.
do,
I did.
do we need to take a snack break here? What's
No, I'm good. I'm good. No, so I think going back to like knowing ourselves, knowing if we're saying yes when we shouldn't,
mhm,
and if we're lying, like that is so important because it's a lie we tell ourselves, right? I mean, I think I heard that from you, but
mhm,
and I, I think now when I catch myself in what are little white lies, things like, oh, traffic was bad or whatever it is, I'm like, ooh, I am not managing my ADHD well.
yeah,
So this is for any time, not just at work, but especially at work, being really honest with ourselves and knowing if a job is not right for us or we need help and accepting that help and knowing that it isn't necessarily just because we have ADHD. It might be it might be because of that, but we don't necessarily know that for sure. And we tend to blame everything on that. Do you know what I'm
mhm.
saying? Like kind of, and I know after I learned more self acceptance, it was much easier for me. The self acceptance and then the self awareness, those two pieces made it much easier for me to advocate for myself.
Now, one of the things that in the next year or so, Jessica McCabe and I are doing is we're putting together this conference, this summit, the ADHD Friendly World Summit, because we believe that an ADHD friendly world is an everybody friendly world. And so I know that there are sort of pockets of places in different work environments that are really being more accommodating and accessible for neurodivergent brains. Now, because I'm sort of in that space, maybe I'm looking for that stuff. From your perspective, do you see that growing? Is it growing fast enough? Is it like
It's never
what's
growing.
your take?
Yeah, it's never growing fast enough, but it is, yes, it's growing. And that was actually my surprise. So
Wait a minute.
I
There's a
know
surprise. Let's take a
there
quick break. Let's
is.
take a quick
Okay.
break. When we
Okay.
come back, surprise. You'll be right back. Did you know about all the other podcasts we have here on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network? With 5 podcasts on the network, there's a little something for everyone. Check out ADHD Essentials with Brendan Mahan, Hacking Your ADHD with Will Curb, ADHD Diversified with MJ Siemens, and the ADHD Friendly Lifestyle with Moira Mabin. And soon to be joining the network is a show with Will Curb and ADHD Rewired coach Roxy Martin called Wait, what was the question? Keep tuning in for announcements on when their show will drop into your favorite podcast player. If you enjoy listening to all of the podcasts on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network and find value in our shows, don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating and review. Share it with your friends and family because sharing is caring. You can find all of our podcasts by going to ADHDrewired.com/podcast network, where you can also subscribe, listen to, and share all of our shows. This is the podcast network for people with ADHD by people with ADHD. We want to thank you, all of our listeners, for tuning in each and every week. We appreciate every single one of you. And if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe and leave a rating and review, please remember to do so. It really does help us. And you can find us at ADHDrewired.com/podcast network. Thank you from all of us in the ADHD Rewired podcast family for checking out our shows, sharing our shows, and for helping us grow, which helps us help you. Thank you. If you're listening to this podcast ad and you really wish you could just skip this part of the podcast without having to stop or push any buttons, there is an option for you. You can get access to ad-free episodes of this show when you become a patron at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon for only $5 a month, which is just about $1 an episode. And this week, we want to thank and welcome Jessica S., Cece, and Stacy G., who all became patrons this week over at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. Thank you for becoming patrons. That is right. I said perks start at just $5 a month, which includes ad-free episodes in a separate podcast feed you can get on the podcast app you're listening to this on right now. On the fourth Tuesday of every month, our $25 a month patrons, I host a coaching call on Zoom. And our next one is actually today, October 26th. We do it the same time every month. It's the fourth Tuesday of every month at 3 p.m. Central. That's 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. If you want to join us, but you aren't a patron yet, get signed up by going to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. No matter the contribution, I am grateful for any contribution you are able to give. Your support helps me grow my team so we can reach out to even more adults with ADHD everywhere. And we're getting ready to bring on another administrative person, so your help makes that happen. So if you love this show, the community, and you learn something new about your own ADHD each week, and you are in a position where you could support us financially, we would love your support. Consider joining us over at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon and become a patron. Member perks start at just $5 a month, and support can start at any amount that makes sense to you. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. And thank you so much. It is the last week of October, which means ADHD Awareness Month is coming to a close, but that doesn't mean ADHD awareness stops here. I mean, I'm aware of my ADHD every month of the year. The International Conference on ADHD is coming up fast. It starts next week from November 4th through November 6th, and you have a chance to take part in this conference virtually. No airfare, no cabs, no hotel bookings. It's all online. And I'll be there too. I'll be speaking about how to make accountability work. To register, go to ADHDrewired.com/ADHDcon. Not only do you not have to worry about all the extra costs that travel can add to conferences, but I was able to get listeners of this show a pretty sweet discount. Get 15% off this incredible conference when you go to ADHDrewired.com/ADHDcon. When you go to ADHDrewired.com/ADHDcon, you'll be redirected to the conference page and the discount will already be applied. Easy, right? That's ADHDrewired.com/ADHDcon. I hope to see you next week. And we're back. All right, so you have a surprise?
I do have a surprise. And now I feel like it's been sort of like built up and it's all right. I'm going to say it. So I have a friend. That's not the surprise, but that
It's so great, Kat.
I know, right? The end. So she is, I will just say that she works for a large credit card company. And
Is it everywhere you want to be?
I don't know what that is. So I'm going to say no, but I'm not going to tell you even if you guess it because
Okay.
I don't know that I can,
Okay.
disclose that. So she was interviewing for a position within the organization and they were saying some of their initiatives for training and development for all of the managers across the corporation were this, that, the other, and neurodiversity. So it is something that was my surprise. And I feel like now it's like, wah. But I was so excited to hear that. And the reason she told me about it is I did the talk at Disrupt HR a few years ago on neurodiversity and in the HR department or in the HR world. Let me start over. So I did a talk.
My rewind sound effect.
Oh, thank you. So I did a talk on neurodiversity and I talked about how to accommodate. So kind of on the flip side, how can companies accommodate for neurodivergent individuals without asking them to disclose their diagnosis? And one of the things I said at the very end was, for those of you who are neurodivergent like me, please know that we are moving the needle forward. And I really, really do think that we are moving the needle forward. And I will say that I am incredibly optimistic about the fact that things are moving faster than I thought they would. So I do believe that the pandemic in general has caused companies to look at a lot of different things very differently, from, the emotional health side of things, to these types of things? Because basically the pandemic sort of made everyone feel like they had ADHD.
I'm really glad that you brought that up because I know that with with remote work being like all these companies who thought they can never do remote work, and then it's like, oh, we have to do remote work, and like, oh, this is actually working for us. And now some companies are going, well, we want to have you back in the office. We'll try this hybrid. And I think that this sort of this hybrid model, I think, is for some people is really challenging. And so I'm just curious as what your thoughts are on like if someone is kind of struggling with this, like the hybrid, or maybe they started a job during the pandemic. It was always hybrid, and now or it was always remote, and now they're going to start to be asked to come back to the office,
Hmm.
which is a completely different environment, especially if they were never in their office.
Hmm.
What would you suggest in that environment?
Again, I think it's the communication of saying, and depending on what it is, some people, when they're at home, they have a harder time concentrating. And I think telling your supervisor, this is what's happening, this is what I'm experiencing. And perhaps it's something like requesting that people do a study hall type thing, or, maybe companies could, I don't know, invest in
Adult study
the
hall?
adult study hall. Yeah, I mean, that could
Brilliant
be,
idea, Kat.
I
I
mean,
love it.
I mean, it really is. It really is something that, again, you could sort of go. A friend of mine was saying, so just in case anybody needs to know, you are my friend, and you can refer to me as your friend. So a friend of mine was saying there's this really cool thing called adult study hall, and you can go in and work, and using something like that. So finding out what works for you. If you are in either one, especially if you're working from home, that's when it can be, I think, a little bit more challenging, and when that might be a little bit more acceptable. And then if you're going back, so the other part of your question was, what if you're now going to the office and you're not used to that? That goes back to asking some questions like, can I move my desk? Can I use noise canceling headphones? I had somebody recently that mentioned to me that because people are on Zoom all the time now, so they are back in the office, but her coworker is a loud talker, always on Zoom. And because these are how the meetings are versus how they used to be, in person and things like that, she's having a hard time concentrating. So she had asked me, what do I do? And we talked about that. And so she reserves the conference room as much as she possibly can so she can go in there and work. And I think it is very similar to what we talked about before, knowing and then just saying, this is what I'm looking for. It will help me with my productivity. Again, talking about how does it benefit the company if I am able to work this way.
What can what can managers and bosses do to be more supportive of neurodivergent brains?
That might be my favorite question ever. I I think we probably, if anybody is listening to this and they are a manager or supervisor, or they probably are more compassionate when it comes to neurodivergent brains, and understanding that not everyone wants to disclose. So I don't think, asking for specific diagnoses. I actually did I say that right? Diagnoses? Is
Yeah,
that right? Do you do? Okay.
yeah.
So I actually had a boss ask me one time, Kat, do you have ADHD? This
Really?
was in HR. And I'm like, you can't ask me that. I mean, you can, but you probably shouldn't. So, what can they do? I think asking people, how is it going? How is this working for you? Is there anything we can do to support you, especially if they are missing deadlines, if they're having some struggles, making it the talk that I'm doing, the most recent Disrupt HR talk, we talk about psychological safety in the workplace. And psychological
So
safety,
important.
yeah, it's a safe place to be able to say, I'm struggling with this, or coming up with ideas, and not feeling like they're going to be ridiculed, or no one's going to hold that against them. So creating that environment for where it's safe for people. And as a manager, you can do this even if the company culture isn't exactly this. Within your department, you can make it this way, and make it where people can come to you and talk to you about what's going on, what they're struggling with, and start looking for solutions.
All right. You probably get asked this question, maybe a lot. Often I think this question comes from people who are very new to ADHD. What's the perfect job for someone with ADHD?
I do get asked that a lot. Being an entrepreneur, no, I no. It actually is. I mean, many entrepreneurs have ADHD because for various reasons. I don't know that there's a perfect job, and it's going to be different for everyone depending on how your ADHD shows up. I think the perfect job is a job that I was gonna say that you feel like you can perform well and you don't have to mask. You can be yourself. And there are creative there are a lot of things that ADHD people are really good at. It might be easier for me to answer questions that people aren't that they wouldn't be good at. Yeah, I can't answer it. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Well, what do you think about what are the types of things you think in general people with ADHD might want to stay away from? I mean, I know for me, the first thing I think of is like cubicle farms. Like, oh God.
Yeah, and I don't know that that's necessarily true for everyone because
Yeah.
I think that some people, like call centers, they might thrive in those environments because you're very busy. You're on the phone all the time. If you've got the headset on, you can't necessarily hear what's going on, and you're typing while you're talking. I mean, I was an HR manager for a call center, and I think that there are some people that would do really well with that. When I was a recruiter, I did really well with making 100 calls and typing while I was talking. And, I enjoyed that. So it was
So it sounds
I,
like you got to do something that's tapping into your
mhm.
strengths
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
probably also your interests. How do you know if you are in a toxic work environment or are you struggling because it's your ADHD?
If it's a toxic work environment or ADHD, I would a couple of different things. One is being honest with yourself, which sounds probably silly, but I think a lot of us sometimes it's easy for us to sort of play the victim on certain things. But looking at, is this something that happens over and over and over again in my life? Then maybe it is something that I'm doing that I could either work on, or I'm putting myself in environments that aren't healthy for me, or aren't the best environments for me. The way to tell if it's a toxic work environment is this happening to people other than just me?
That's a good, okay. I like
So
that.
I
I like that. Um, all right, we are getting close to the end here. Get if someone's listening to this and they're just kind of struggling with work, can I ask you to maybe talk just briefly about your thoughts on the challenges you're having, people having at the workplace, and how this is an extremely self-serving question, and how the ADHD rewired coaching groups might be helpful.
No, I don't think it's self-serving because it helped me and I've seen it help a lot of other people. So, I
Mm.
mean, I get why you're saying that, but one of the things we didn't say in the very beginning is yes, I've been with ADHD rewired since 2015, but I also I've admined, so I've been through a lot of groups and seen a lot of people come through the program. The question was, how does it help them if they're really, really struggling? Is that
Yeah, like if they like, well, I just gotta get my work done. Like how have you seen people utilize what their group experience and the process of group um to help them with workplace related issues?
Whew, I've got several things popping into my head right now, so I'm gonna try to articulate them. The first thing is, I think, knowing that you're not broken. You process differently, and I think knowing that is huge, and it's a place to kind of start healing a little bit, so that you can go, okay, now I know. I can start to get to know my brain differently and know what works for it. So I think really seeing that you're not broken, you process differently, and then also learning how it does manifest, how your brain kind of where our deficiencies may be when it comes to traditional work environments. So now you have this knowledge of, oh, this is why this is hard for me. So many times we think it's just me, and then you're like, oh no, it's actually ADHD and how it manifests. So I think knowing understanding your brain better is another thing that helps tremendously. And I think another one is just all of the tools that we get. So we get this huge toolbox full of tools that we're able to pull out at different times, and you can try them at work. You can, use things like planning and time blocking, different things that help manage your time in a way that would be helpful in the work environment. And I think also, you can also see, is it the job or is it me?
I think when you start to just share kind of what's happening at work with others, I think you get a sense of like, that's messed up, or like, ooh, that sounds hard, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I know one of the things that I've seen with a number of people who've gone through the group is instead of using their boss as an accountability partner for checking on reports, they use their accountability team members.
Yes.
And I think that's really good because it's like if you're struggling to do the thing, it's like you don't want to always be sharing with your boss that you're struggling to do the thing, but
Yes.
you can share that with your team.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. The accountability piece of it is huge.
Any final thoughts, Kat?
Yeah. So one of the things when I went out on my own, and I think if anybody wants to go back and listen to episode 170, I talk about how I'd started my own business because I was not fitting in well or there were some things that within the HR world, there are some things that I love about HR, and there are some things that don't necessarily fit well with my ADHD. So I had started my own company, and when I was with ADHD Rewired, we had are you ready to hear this?
Yeah.
We had an assignment, or I'm sorry, not an assignment. We didn't have any assignments. We had an exercise that we did called Fantasy Admin. Do you remember that one?
Mm-hmm.
So when we did that, there was something I'd wanted to do for about 3 years, and I did fantasy admin. And by the time we finished group, I had used that exercise to run a focus group to then within a short period of time launch my business, that side of my business. So had I not gone through ADHD Rewired, I don't know that I would have launched my business.
Wow.
I don't know if you knew that.
I'm not sure if I
Do
did.
you remember that?
I don't know if I knew
Yeah.
that. If I did, it was great because I got to experience it all again for the first time.
I know, right?
No, that's great. And, like we see a lot of people too who do complete career changes or at least
Yes.
a lot of job changes. People come in, they just want to learn how to do better at their job. And then they realize, oh, this is not the
Right.
job for
Yeah.
me.
And that's not a bad thing. I mean, I think
Right.
it's really good to know that. And, again, it goes back to being aware, and then and that helps us advocate.
Kat Hoyer, thank you so much for coming on and honestly bailing my ass out because I didn't have like an interview lined up, and everyone was going to be without an episode next week, but you saved me. So
Yay.
thank you.
Well, thank you for bearing with me while I tried out, I think, like 16 different headphones.
Oh my God, it was painful.
Yeah. And the end.
This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening, and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHDrewired.com. You can find time-stamped summaries and additional resources for each episode. Apply to join our free and secret Facebook community. Learn more about our award-winning intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. Join the Adult Study Hall virtual co-working membership community. Find all the other podcasts on the ADHD Rewired podcast network. Sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content that you won't hear anywhere else. And use the search tool to find episodes on specific topics. You can do all of this at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click on the Patreon button. If you are a regular listener, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to you, the listener, but it's not free to produce. Plus, patrons get cool perks like ad-free episodes and access to recordings of coaching calls, and $25 a month patrons can join me once a month for a group coaching call. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD rewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. Subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube to see selective interviews and other videos I've made. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends, family, your therapists, your coaches, doctors, siblings, parents. And if you, your coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at the website, ADHDrewired.com. If you're a member of CHAD, ADA, or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this show and all of the shows on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. And if you really loved this particular episode, please hit share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I do count on you to help spread this message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other app that supports reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at Audible by going to audibletrial.com/ADHD rewired. Here is my list of must-listen-to audiobooks updated July 2021. Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Attached by Amir Levin and Rachel Heller. Atomic Habits by James Clear. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson. The Coaching Habit by Michael Stainer. The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Rest by Alex Sujong Kim Pang. The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins. Make It Stick. The Science of Successful Learning by Peter Brown. The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey. Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. I always recommend to my coaches and admin that they read that book. The One Thing by Gary Keller, a required reading for all of our coaching group members. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Baden. The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. And if you're looking for something a little bit more magical, I have fallen in love with the Harry Potter series, and the narrator, Jim Dale, is amazing. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus, all of her stuff is great, starting with Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, and the Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader, be sure to check out her book, Dare to Lead. Do you have something that you would like to share? Click on the podcast tab at ADHD Rewired. Click the button to be a guest at the top of the page and schedule a 15-minute interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, growing, and connecting. Self-care is not selfish. No matter what you get done or don't get done, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. And we don't need to do them in the hardest way possible. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.